All right. Welcome back. It's been a little while. Welcome from Kauai. All right. So, what I want to do is I'm going to give you the presentation that I gave at New Living Expo 2026. So that's what I plan on doing, and giving you some updates as we go along. So let's go ahead and get into that presentation. So I'm going to share my screen, and I need to find the PowerPoint presentation, and it should be up there, and there it is. All right. Okay, so let's start here. Just load it up. All right. Spectacular. All right. So this presentation's on the 363 code, Tesla's mathematics, and geometry of living systems. And we've got this nice lotus here that's got 13 petals, very strong life force energy right here. That's why you're seeing it there. All right, so many of you know that my background is in biochemistry. I teach that and also genetics, molecular biology, and proteomics at the university level. So I have a lot of experience working with genes, gene manipulation, proteomics, proteins, quantification of proteins. And that's why I work with mass spectrometry, which is a way to break proteins. We break proteins apart into pieces and then we fragment the peptides inside of the mass spectrometer and measure their masses. And basically, it's a way to rebuild the peptide sequences to search databases to identify proteins, or we can also use it to study protein structure, and I have a strong background in looking at gene expression as well. So, for the past 2 decades, I've been studying biological materials, specifically spider silk. And spider silk is just not a normal material. It's made out of protein, and it represents one of the most extraordinary biomaterials that's on the planet. And you can actually test the material properties of spider silk and compare it to steel and other man-made, non-man-made materials that are on the planet to see how it actually compares. So I also, if you've read my book, you know that I work on black widow spiders. You know, there's a whole storyline there. Why is that the model system? But I can tell you a little bit about the material properties. If you collect a spider silk fiber, dragline silk, which is the fiber that they use for locomotion, then if you had an equivalent weight basis and you compared it to steel, it would perform as well or be stronger than steel. So when you look at materials, there are generally three very important properties that you want to keep your eye on. One is the breaking strength. This is the amount of force it takes to snap the fiber. You also want to look at how extensible it is. This is known as breaking strain. So you have breaking stress, which is the tensile strength. So when you snap the fiber and then breaking, um, if you look at the breaking strain, it's how much does it stretch before it fails, and then those two properties together will give you the toughness. So if a material is not very extensible, like steel, nobody goes bungee cord jumping with steel cable because it's not extensible. And you know what will happen once you hit the end of that cable. Um, Spider silk actually has a combination of being a little bit stretchy and also having high tensile strength. So overall, that gives a material that's tougher. The silk proteins will self-assemble, and this is very fascinating that they will self-assemble as they are being extruded. Also, the material exists in the spider as a liquid crystal, and then it's extruded, and water is, like shed, and it goes into a solid fiber as it goes down the spinning duct of the spider, which is like a hose that narrows, and there's pH change, probably redox change, shear force, salt changes that all brings it together into this solid fiber. So we've attempted to replicate this in the laboratory. Certainly, I've cloned a lot of the genes, spider silk genes, over my career. I've isolated those genes, placed those genes into bacteria. Bacteria have expressed the spider proteins. We've purified these proteins. We've spun them into synthetic fibers using a syringe, but we can't, when we test them, quite replicate the same mechanical properties of natural silk. So we're missing some components, some steps, some things we don't understand about nature. So in this image here, here's the black widow spider, the black beauty, here's the red hourglass. Yeah, this over here is to the left is an image from an egg sac. And so there's two different diameter fiber types that are in here. It's a composite. And this is the larger diameter fibers, tubuliform silk, and there's a smaller one that's wrapping silk called the aciniform silk. So here's a problem. We've cloned the spider silk genes, we've expressed them, I've analyzed the proteins using high resolution mass spectrometry, and we can recreate the components, but we can't reproduce the process of having synthetic silk that matches natural silk. The material properties just don't match. So what are we missing? This is the big question. Like, what are we missing here in this process? And when I was doing all of this specific work, we did a lot of micro dissections of the black widow spiders. This is a female that you're seeing here. They're bigger than the males. The abdomen's much larger. They're easier to dissect. I kept looking at this red hourglass, and it's like it does carry a symbol. But it's not just a warning mark for birds that's, don't eat me. And it's actually geometric if you look at it. It has two triangles. And overall, I finally realized that this hourglass is the divine leaving a symbol, which the divine often does to describe processes that occur in either physics, biology. And what you're really looking at here is you're looking at compression, expansion, and a central inversion point. You're looking at a structure that is describing how the universe breathes. So an exhale, which is more of the magnetic force or magnetism and going into a toroidal field. And then you have compression where the actual waves will return, and everything's coming out of like a singularity, and they will return and the waves will accelerate. And this is known as dielectric acceleration. Some people call this gravity. And then you have this point of constriction, that's the inversion point right in the center. So I started to really ask, like, is biology following a pattern that we're not recognizing? So this is where kind of Tesla comes in, Nikola Tesla. So I'm surprised often to find that there are a lot of individuals who are not familiar with Nikola Tesla, not Elon Musk Tesla, the car. Most even in academia, when I talk to students, they're introduced to Einstein, and that's all in physics, and that's all fine. Einstein was a brilliant, he had a brilliant mind. But he was more of a theoretical physicist, and Tesla was more of an experimental physicist. So Tesla built things, and Tesla was suggesting that numbers are not just quantities, but they're expressions of energy and pattern. So let me clarify this. Today we're taught numbers, we bean count. We're very good bean counters. But that's not how Tesla was looking at the numbers. He was looking at them as expressions of energy, pattern, geometry. And our numbers, do they represent compressed forms of geometry? I want you to ponder that for a moment. So every time you write a number, is it like a file for your computer that's compressed and then you have to unzip it? And unzipping it may give you the three-dimensional structures that we see in nature. So I started to look at vortex mathematics, and a lot of students also, and many individuals don't know what vortex mathematics, what that is. It's not really taught. I don't think it's taught in high school. It's not taught in elementary school, but it's hugely important. It's not even taught, I think, at the collegiate level. So I'm going to show it to you so that you can see it. Not very complicated, but very powerful. And then I'll show you how it appears in biology. Before I do that, I want to talk a little bit about Nikola Tesla, famous picture here. And he's sitting in front of his impulse coil. And Tesla was just a phenomenal genius, expert in electricity, and he made many contributions, he had a lot of patents. So I'm just going to mention a few things that he was known for. Alternating current. This would be the electricity that arrives at all of our homes. That's transferred down power lines at the speed of light, that enters into your house and then is converted into direct current, because direct current cannot be transferred over large distances without having the dissipation of large amounts of energy, but alternating current does not do that. The electric motor, oh, this is one of his big ones. He came up with the electric motor. We use this today in our cars. It's all over. Wireless transfer of energy. This is another one. And there's so many more. This guy, why he's not mentioned more in physics blows my mind, because we're using all his all the things he designed today. He actually was he was a proponent of resonance, not Newtonian force. So this is another thing that's not really emphasized from my perspective in physics at the level it needs to be. So resonance has to do, give you a couple of examples. If there is a crystal glass in front of me, and the molecules in the crystal glass are vibrating at a specific frequency, if I sing and my acoustics, they match that vibrational frequency, the molecules in that glass, the energy will begin to build up. I'll be in resonance or communication with the glass. And if I do this long enough, it will ultimately shatter. So this is more an aspect of resonance. I'm in communication with the molecules, I'm entangled with them. There's an exchange of a flow of energy going back and forth. Similar to if soldiers are walking across the bridge and they hit the right rhythm, the cadence that matches the bridge will come down. That's a little bit different than me taking a sledgehammer and I'm using actual force, push, pull, like aircraft today. It's like we're pushing against air. That's more Newtonian force. But that's not Tesla. Tesla was about resonance, about taking the energy from the planet and harnessing that energy that's in nature. And so he believed in the ether. And the ether, the physicists got rid of the ether. There was an experiment that was done, and from my perspective, They disproved a static ether, but not a dynamic ether. And the ether is dynamic. And since then, it's just been kind of gotten rid of. And now you see it's trying to be worked back in with different language, dark energy, dark matter, because you actually, this invisible grid that's, say, between you and I is geometric. It's also harmonic, and it's loaded with energy. And so the physicists are having to kind of bring it back in, and thus reintroduce it and using other language. Now, Einstein was familiar with it. It's fabric of space-time. It's also referred to as subtle energy, background energy. This all kind of means the same thing in my mind. So this quote that is out there about Tesla mentioning if you understood the magnificence of the numbers 369, you'd have the keys to the universe. And so I want to explore kind of what that means. And it plays out in his vortex mathematics. So I want to show you a simple doubling of numbers. So I'm going to start with the number one. I'm going to take it and I'm going to double it. And you're going to get a two. If I double the two, we'll get a four. I double the four, we'll get an eight. I double the two eights, I get a 16. But if I want to make it a single digit, this is called modulus 9, where I make the digits from 1 to 9. So it's going to be a single digit. So I'm just going to add the 1 and 6 and get a 7. If I double the 16, I'll get 32. But again, if I want to make it a digital root mod 9, that's only one number, the 3 and the 2 go to a 5. And if I keep doing this and keep doubling and doubling, you're going to see the same pattern reappear. This 1, 2, 4, 8, 7, 5, 1, 2, 4, 8, 7, 5. Okay, and the interesting thing about those numbers is 1, 2, 4, 8, 7, 5. They add to 27. More on that later. There's no 3, there's no 6, there's no 9 in that doubling pattern. If you take the numbers and you also then start halving them, then you'll get zero point 0.5, and then half of zero point 0.5 is 0.25. And you can see I can add these numbers, get rid of the decimal point, and you're going to see 578,421. So this is actually the reverse of these numbers right here. The energy, think of this as energy flowing forward, energy going backwards. Think of this as maybe this is magnetic, this is dielectric. You're seeing opposites here. And you could be talking about oscillation, polarity. And you can see that this is right here, what could also be described as in music, harmonics, octaves, where you would double a frequency or half it, and they would be in resonance with one another. So I'm also just showing you this because this in biology is this energy shows up in biology. You have a sperm will fertilize an egg, and you'll start from a single cell. It will double and go to two, and from two it'll go to four, and then four to eight, and then 8 to 16, and 32, and 64. So you see the same patterning of energy, flow of energy in nature. So this is going to be very important as we go because this is like a looping cycle. If you notice, there's no 3, 6, or 9, but I'm going to show you. I'm going to try to incorporate these numbers in a model that I've developed. So this is describing rotational behavior. It's energetic flow of energy. So I was working with the hourglass. So I took those numbers, and you can why was I compelled to do this? I just felt like I needed to do it. I was working on Black Widow Spider. Here's the hourglass. So here you can see the red hourglass. I put the 1, 2, 4 on the top and the 8, 7, 5 on the bottom. And immediately then I noticed that the 1 and the 8 was 9, the 2 and the 7 was 9, the 4 and the 5 was 9. I also then put the 3 and the 6 here on this axis, more of the this other axis that's right down this central point right here. And I put at the constriction the 0 and the 9. I put dashed lines across here, and then immediately if you pull this up, this point here, the constriction, it will remind you of the Great Pyramid in Egypt. And yes, the Great Pyramid in Egypt, it has a square base. It has four triangles, but the triangles actually have creases right down the center because if they didn't, it would be energetically harmful. And that looks like this right here. So wow, that's kind of interesting. If you pull these two apart, which I've done here, the two, so it's because it's symmetrical, the two halves, you get 1, 2, 4, or 1, 2, 7, 8, and then there's 2, 4, 7, 5. And I will talk more about this because there's hidden significance in here, is that if you take the numbers and this like this 2, 4, 7, 5, and then you subtract it from its mirror, I came up with this mere subtraction concept. With subtraction in mathematics, is we've been doing it for a long time, and addition too, division and multiplication. But when you ask somebody, what are you doing when you're doing subtraction, multiplication, or division, people can't tell you really what the philosophy is. They can go through the operations, but they can't tell you what they're really doing. That's interesting. Actually needs further exploring for the individual to think a little bit deeper. But when I did this, and I'll talk more about that, and I put it through an iteration, I ended up getting this number 2178 that I'm going to talk more about as we go through. So I took this number over here, and then I ultimately got this half over here. So what does that all mean, mathematically speaking, and how does that relate to flow of energy and Tesla? I'll get into that a little bit later. So I actually stepped out of biology and I started looking at numbers, but not from bean counting. I started looking at the numbers as numbers that were more geometric, more numbers that were more capable of being compressed forms of geometry that could breathe. Um, and this is when I found something that was kind of deep within me because I found that some numerical sequences upon mirror reflection would collapse, so they would decay and they disappear, but others wouldn't. They would stabilize. So the numbers, when I started looking at our standard numbers that everybody works with on a day by day basis, I found like almost two categories of the numbers and how they were behaving. So I applied this mirror operation method. And it was basically taking a number, its reflection, and I was subtracting the two, and I kept doing it to see if it would collapse to zero, which most numbers actually do. So I'll show you an example of this. But then I found this class of numbers that resisted collapsing to zero based on the mere subtraction. It's like, whoa, what's up with these numbers? And then I got to show you these. These will blow your mind. And then these numbers didn't collapse. They just persisted. They recurred. And every one of them that led back to the same numerical family. And it's this family that is something I need to discuss with you. So I really, stopped guessing. One of my students wrote a custom like script in R, and we analyzed numbers all the way up to 100,000, searching for numbers that didn't collapse to zero under this iterated mere subtraction. And we found a pattern of numbers, which that became known as the 1089 multiple family. That's kind of what I named it. So let me show you mere subtraction, numbers collapsing to zero. So I'm just going to pick a 4-digit number, 2100. I'm going to minus it by its mirror. So in nature, structures always do mirrors. So this is minus 0012. I get 2088. And then I take that number and then I will subtract it from its mirror, 8802. 6714. And if I keep doing this, I can go down this long stretch and eventually this thing is going to collapse to zero. Now, what's going on here, and this is not even described in mathematics, which is kind of interesting, is this process of what I'm doing is I'm starting with a number. The number represents a geometric structure. And by doing iterated mere subtraction, I'm removing the asymmetry from this structure by mere subtraction. till finally it gets down to where it's symmetrical, and then boom, it just collapses back into this zero. All the energy will just dissipate back and say to this to the 0 point. So this is the zero there. But then I found some numbers that didn't do this. They wouldn't collapse to the zero. So I'm going to use one here to show you this 1232. And I'm going to do mere subtraction off it, iterated because I just keep repeating the steps. And immediately from this one, I get 1089. And if I 1089 minus its mirror, 8712, 8712 minus 2178, it's mirror, 6534. And then you're going to see something very interesting. It ends up going back to this convergence number, this 2178, which is a multiple of 1089. It's 1089 times 2. So when I ran all of these numbers, the ones that did not collapse to zero, I found these numbers. 1089, 2178, 3267, 4356, 5445, 6534, 76, 23, 87, 12, and 9801. And so I'm looking at these numbers because if you have these numbers, eventually, if you take them, they're going to go to 2178 and 6534. They're going to go in this two-cycle kind of loop. But when I saw these, I noticed that they're mirrors. 1089 and 9801, they're mirrors of one another themselves. They're 1089 multiples. This is 1089, 1089 times 9 is 9801. 2178, this is 2 times 1089. And then here's its mirror, 8712. See that? 8712. And then 3267, 7623. These are mirrors. So I put these in colors, and there's the one sitting in the dead mid, the dead middle has no mirror, but it's a mirror itself. And it's 1089 times 5. So these weren't, I looked at these and went, wow, there's 4 mirror pairs. There's one at the center. And they all seem to converge to this 2178. And I thought, wow, this has to be significant and important. And then this was my first indication. I wasn't just looking at pure arithmetic anymore. These numbers had huge significance. So I'm representing these as energetic shells that are nested shells. Sometimes you might see this maybe with electrons and shells when you're talking about atoms. But these are also harmonic because 1089, if we double it, we go to 2178. So if this is the first harmonic frequency, we can double it. So these are rings of coherence. I'm going to just define them like that. They're harmonic because you can see the doubling here, and you can even 2178 can double that to 4356. So there's definitely octaves, harmonics that are listed here. And then I also describe these as if we talk about planes, different dimensional planes as well. So these are like different dimensional planes or steps. I don't like normally using the term planes, but I think it helps some individuals understand this. So recursion just has to do with repeating a specific unit. So there were 9 of these distinct scalar shells. So at this point, it came really clear to me these numbers weren't collapsing. They weren't collapsing to the 0 point. They were stabilizing in a different geometry. So I kept doing the mirror subtraction, but these numbers would not lose their asymmetry. In fact, they wouldn't collapse to the 0. They were stable geometric structures. That's how I would describe them. And so the other numbers are able to collapse to the 0, but these would not do that. So the mere subtraction is a way, from my opinion, to check whether or not a number is phase stable. And if it collapses to 0, when you're going through the iterations, then you've removed all the asymmetry, and there are some molecules that you cannot do that with. All right, so then I was thinking, wow, this 1089 multiple families because I was studying Buckminster Fuller's geometry very closely. And I'm thinking we've got a whole like parallel set of geometry that's running here. So we're taught geometry. We're taught that in elementary school. We get it in high school. They don't really teach a lot of it in college. And we're taught straight lines, 360-degree circles. But I was seeing like a parallel geometric system. One I'm going to refer to as a scalar geometry. And it's a geometry that's based on whole number harmonics. I'm not going to be using irrational numbers. No infinity. I'm going to be using whole number, whole number harmonics and rational numbers. So this is the geometry of nature or operational mathematics. That's what I'm going to be applying. And this is a little bit different than what some of the mathematicians are kind of using now when they include irrational numbers, like what such as pi and infinity. Now, those are tools that the mathematicians can use, but cannot be demonstrated in nature. So I'm going to stay with nature. And so this shift also, I'm going to introduce, this is the title of the book. This people always look at the title of the book and they think it should be 369, and it's like they get confused because they see 363 and they think I made an error in the title of the book, but no. I'm shifting the circle 3 degrees. When you do that, you divide the circle then 363 by 11, you get intervals, 11 intervals that are 33 degrees. And everything becomes whole number coherency. So this simple 3-degree shift, you can see what that's going to be. If we take this ratio of the Euclidean geometry to scalar, it's 1.008333. So this would convert a 60-degree angle into 60.5. So if you're thinking about equilateral triangle, the internal angle, there are 3 of them, 60 degrees or 180 degrees for all 3. It would be 181.5 degrees for that triangle. So this is the shift, just so you can kind of see this. Direct comparison here. If we look at these, so Euclidean circle, scalar circle. Okay, you can see there's a 3-degree shift. The structure here, I'm talking about a harmonic lattice. I'm talking about 11 intervals that are separated by 33 degrees. In Euclidean circle, it's just straight line segmentation. And in Euclidean circles, you have constants, pi is a rational number. I'm going to be using rational ratios in my system, this 369, 1089 system. Behavior. I believe the geometry is static in Euclidean circle, and I believe it's more breathing toroidal in the scalar circle. Euclidean circle, largely used for measurements, scalar circle, resonance, and memory. Geometric type, flat abstractions here in Euclidean circle, and this is an energetic structure here in the scalar circle. So this 1089 field, 1089 is not just a number. It's, yes, you can see it's 33 times 33. This is 1089. I could spend a long time talking about this number 33 and how it appears in our history, Freemasonry, the death of Christ, many things here with this number. And 1089 itself is like an attractor. Other numbers will converge to it, but ultimately they will end up in that 2-cycle loop with 2178 and 6534. So this number, however, this 1089, I believe is the square base pyramid that's phase shifted by 90 degrees or by 9 degrees. That is actually the one that you would see more in Egypt. And it's the first fundamental frequency, harmonic frequency, and I'm going to call it the scalar harmonic field. All right, so let me show you. So I was very interested in going back, and Tesla kept saying there's this etheric lattice. And where was he coming up with this 369 key to the universe? So with the circle being 363 degrees, I broke it into 11 intervals. And so I'll just show you the math here. 33 times 1 times 2 times 3. You can see it goes 33, 66, 99, 132, 165, 198, 231, 264, 297, 330, 363. If you add these numbers up and just look at the digital roots, the 3 and 3 is 6, the 6 and 6 is 12, a 1 and a 2 is a 3, 9 and 9 is 18, a 1 and 8 is a 9. So I could just, you could go down and look at these digital roots, but they're showing Tesla's 369, a triad. So this is going to represent, if I make a circle and I divide it by 11 intervals, then I made a second larger circle, I just kept going and also 11 intervals. And I went even further. I went all the way to 33. So I have three. I'm going to show you in just a second. I have three concentric rings that have each one has 11 intervals. And then the other thing here that's interesting, if I did the scalar reflection, so if I took 33 and then I added it to its mirror, and I did what's called mirror addition, so I would get 330, 363 here. And then for this one, I'd have 66, 660, 726. I'll get 3, 6. You'll see these digital roots. And if you add these, they're both nines, all of them. All right, so that's fascinating itself, but ultimately you end up with 289. So here it is. So you can kind of see this here. There's one concentric ring, a second concentric ring, and then a third one is what I'm showing you here, a triad. Now, immediately, this looks like Nikola Tesla's impulse coil, this famous picture that you see, and it also looks like an orb web of spiders that nature does. You see these radial lines, the concentric rings, the little dots are the nodes. So this is here. This is would like that would be where you would see the singularity, but this is 33, 66, 99. 132. So we're going around. There's 11 divisions here. This is the second ring. Here's the third one. Okay. So this is what I'm going to refer to as the 33 lattice, but 33 times 33 is 1089. 1089. So you can see here, I'm just making it a little bit easier so you can kind of see where these nodes are coming from. Again, this is the etheric lattice. This is what I would say is an invisible structure that's chock full of energy. These are different nodes here represent locations where the energy can be coherent. There's stable at these different locations. So as a recap, this lattice is this invisible like grid between you and me, chock full of energy. It's a 33 base structure divided into 11 intervals, and it acts like a scaffold, a field. So it's really a field that can organize matter, and a system like this doesn't collapse, it circulates. And that is circulation follows a specific angular shift that's 297 degrees phase shift. And in conventional thinking, waves return directly, but in this system, they don't, they rotate. And this 297 degrees phase shift is what introduces the structure. So I'm not going to talk a lot about this. I believe this is the law of time that Ibrahim Karim talks about in some of his work, his physics of quality that he goes over, but I will leave that for another day. So this hourglass field. So we'll go back to the hourglass. This is also many things. I mentioned that it's the breadth of the universe, but anytime you get waves that are moving and they're in motion, they get time stamped. So it's breathing. You have the universe breathing. So you can have an exhale, which would mean outward flow, an inhale, which would be an inward flow, central inversion point. So this is the same that we're seeing actually in the spider. So let's look here. I want to show you the difference between the geometry because I mentioned that these numbers, this 1089 multiples, I believe they're geometric as well. So in standard Euclidean geometry, 1080 would represent the summation of the angles of a square base pyramid. And I'm not going to go over a lot of this right now, but the 1080 is the square base pyramid has a square base and 90-degree angles. There's four of them. So that's 360 degrees, four triangles. Each triangle is 180 degrees. So 4 times 180 is 720 degrees plus 360, you get 1080. So what do we even care about, like adding and summing up the internal angles of structures? Because the universe only does two things. It does frequency, vibration, or it does shape, angle shape. And it has to do with magnitude volume and how much energy can the container hold. So 1080 is in the square base pyramid in Euclidean geometry. So like you can see I list some of those. 2160 would be the cube, or it could be two square base pyramids put together. We call that an octahedron. 4320, for example, or rhombic dodecahedron. So these are all numbers that are multiples of 1080. And then here's my series, the 1089 multiple family. And without going all over this, I just want you to do the math here between the difference between these two. It's 9, then it's 18, 27, 36 between these two. You see the whole 9 times table popping out here, which is, I don't know what to say, but it's, if you ever wondered maybe what the 9 times table comes from, and you can look, this is 9, 18, 27, 36, 45, and you notice that it reverses. It goes 54, then you see 63, and then 72 at 27, and then see everything just flows the opposite polarity. So I began to think, okay, if this is correct, can we find any clues of this mathematics in ancient history? So I started to look into Egypt. I was being pulled to Egypt. So I looked at one of the most, important glyphs, the weighing of the heart glyph, which I'll show you. And there's, I believe, encryptions of the mathematics in this glyph. I could talk about pyramid ratios and the numbers I'm looking at. I can also talk about certain, if we look at polygons, heptagons and pentagons, they weren't just like telling stories. The ancient Egyptians, I believe, were preserving knowledge of structure in the glyphs. So before I go further, you can also do a mathematical operation that I'm referring to as mere addition, where you can then take a number and take its mirror and then add them together. Interestingly enough, Nikola Tesla's room in the New Yorker hotel. So basically, he wanted to give energy away free, and that didn't sit well with some of the elite. And so he had a hard time getting funding, and he didn't have a lot of money at the end of his career. He ended up living in the New Yorker Hotel in room 3327, but 33 times 27. So if you go back and look at that etheric lattice, that's 891. If you add it to its mirror, 198, you get 1089 square base pyramid. So that's really strange that that comes out that way. Was he encrypting something in his room number? So this is when you're doing this mirror addition and you add two numbers, it brings the system back to unity. So you have two mirrored orientations, and they're combining back into a single harmonic identity. That's what's going on. They're being unified into one structure. So here is this glyph. This glyph came out of the Papyrus Institute in Egypt, and I brought it back from Egypt. And I just wanted to, so this is it's kind of glyph that is a glyph that describes, if you're not familiar with it, it's in the Book of the Dead, and it describes a funeral kind of scene. And the ancient Egyptians were very interested in, I'll call it the afterlife, but I want to be clear that I don't think there's a everything I believe we're multidimensional, everything happens at the same time. So there's not there's not the past, present, future, everything is in the now. But in our avatars, without getting into too much here, the suits are set to see everything in a linear fashion. So you think there is a past, present, and a now. But that's a whole nother conversation. So I'm just going to describe here that they, the Egyptians were preparing when an individual passed away for a journey through what they call the underworld. And here is on this kind of bottom register, this individual that's known as Annie, and this is Anubis, one of the gods, and he's got what you see is this jackal head, and he actually appears more than once. He's here, and then he appears over here. There are 33 scrolls that go across here that are hanging down these columns. And there's a scale here, and this is where it gets the weighing of the heart because there's a heart on one portion of the scales, and there's a feather on the other. And so if you demonstrated excellence of action during your lifetime, then you had a good heart. It's light and it would weigh less than the feather. So you would pass this test, and Anubis is sitting here as the guardian of this. This here's like a hybrid, looks like a crocodile. And this is Amit and will devour the heart if you don't pass the test. But in this case, Annie passes the test. Here's Tahuti or Tot. He's an Egyptian god. He's the scribe. He's keeping a document. And then over here, this is Horus. So Annie passes the test. And over here in this other chamber, there's Osiris, he is the god of the underworld. And then these two sisters, Isis and Nephthys, are in here, and these are four of Horus's sons that's on the top of this lotus. So there's so much that's embedded in here that I think the historians are missing with the numerology that I could spend more time going into this, but I just want to point out a few things at this point. Don't lose track of what I'm trying to demonstrate. I'm trying to see in this glyph, can we find any traces that will match the mathematics, the numbers that I have brought up? Well, first of all, there are 33 of these vertical columns. So right away, that's like, oh, that's interesting. And then we have 7 individuals that are here, some gods that are here in this image here, but there are 7. Over here, there's also 7. And then on the top, there are initiates on the top. There are 14 initiates. Over here, there's 25 like decorative items across over here. So I'm just showing some of these things. So there's 7 gods and goddesses here. There's 7 over here. But 33 times 7 is 231. You add it to its mirror, and you get 363. These initiates up here too, starting left to right, there's 14. Notice how these three, number 3 has the same color, 7 and 11. So if you multiply these numbers, 3 times 7 times 11, you get 231, add its mirror, 363. 33 times 7 and 7, or 77, is 2541 minus its mirror, you get 1089. And then these two here, Anubis and Annie, they both show up twice. So here's Annie over here, and here Anubis is twice. You could call that 22 times 33 or 726, the phase shifted tetrahedron. And I could go deeper into this, and you'll just see that I can find these are matching the mathematics. Now, some people are going to say, oh, that's coincidental. Personally, I think not. I think this is an encryption of the energy. The ancient Egyptians were not using gas and they weren't using coal for energy. They were pulling the flow of the life force energy to their physical 3D structures. So let me explain. When you look at the galaxy and you see the galaxy spinning, where's the energy coming from? It's in the invisible space. One of the things that when Einstein came up with the famous equation, E equals mc squared, energy equals mass times the speed of light squared, Tesla told him the energy's not in the atom, it's in the space around the atom. When when they asked Einstein, what's it feel like to be a genius? He said, I don't know, go ask Nikola Tesla. So these are just things here, connections here that are clues here that we need to pay very close attention to some of these things. Now let's go back to biology. So I'm going to return to the spider. So what happens if we were to look at DNA structure, protein folding, and all the material formation? They're not just purely driven by chemistry, but they're being guided by this underlying geometry, this geometry that's in this invisible lattice that we cannot see. Because I work with DNA and also have studied a lot of Buckminster Fuller's work, I'm just showing you here like a base pair that you would see in DNA. And yes, there's shapes that you see in DNA. There are shapes. And there are what we call bases, nitrogenous bases. They have nitrogen atoms in these ring structures. And there are purines and what are called pyrimidines. A purine has two like a pentagon fused to a hexagon. And the pyrimidines are just a six-membered ring. But if Buckminster Fuller said everything was a triangle, every time you see something you recognize and you say, I recognize that it's a triangle because this is the most stable polygon that nature does. So I'm breaking these into triangles. And so this base pair here, if you can see, if you count all the triangles, there's 11 of them. And then down the backbone over here, there's a 5-carbon sugar. It's a deoxyribose. That's what it's called. And there's a phosphate group, which models with 4 triangles. So there's actually 11 and there's 7 right here. And this is actually one of the ratios that you're actually, this is a ratio you're going to see in the Great Pyramid in Giza. If you measure the base versus the height, what they do in cubits. But then so this is if you look at the total number of triangles, it's 18. Well, that's a 9. 18 times 181.5 degrees is the third shell, harmonic shell, that I saw at 3267. So what does this all mean? Well, I mentioned earlier that the Egyptians, they were building their physical structures, their pyramids, using specific dimensions and angles. And they, I believe, knew what the geometry of the invisible space was. And they were through resonance, they were connecting to it, and the energy was flowing just like the energy flows to move the planets and move the galaxy in a spiral. They were pulling the energy to their 3D structures and harmonizing everybody that was in that area. So this is taking us back to Tesla. Everything was resonance. We can act, so we don't need to create new energy. We just need to connect with this invisible grid and have the energy flow. So everything, structures governed by geometry, the energy must be as well. And I believe numbers, when you write a number, it's the most compressed form of geometry, and then it will unfold into specific shapes. So as I mentioned, this is not about, creating energy. It's about accessing we don't need to create energy. We're swimming in energy like air around us. There's energy that's between you and me. We just need to be able to access that so that the energy flows. So back and forth, always in resonance, you have a minimum of 2 objects that are entangled in the energy going back and forth, or information exchange is also energy. So we need alignment. We need coherency with those other shapes or structures for the energy to flow. So when we look at this, can we find examples where these patterns will show up? Now, I don't have time to go into this, but this is in depth, in great detail, but I'm going to introduce it here because I want you to see some things that are here. This is Seshat. This is the consort for Tahuti or Thoth, the goddess of balance, the order, geometry, she and structure. She was helping when they were constructing the pyramids and the temples. She was helping so that they would get the right dimensions and the right angles so it would resonate with the cosmos, the stars, so that the energy could flow backwards and forwards. This is Seshat. And look at her crown. I believe this represents, it's a seven-pointed crown. This is a heptagon, and embedded in here is a pentagon. There's geometry here. I believe this is also the 363 circle being represented here, concealed here. No one is really talking about this and the kind of way that I'm speaking about it, but I'm seeing it from a geometric, energetic standpoint as we go through here. So the number seven, of course, number seven's important. Here are the seven gates of Osiris. You can see these gates are nested with one another. This is actually taken when we actually in Karnak and you look at Upper Egypt. So then here's the 363 circle. If you place the heptagon on the inside, it's a seven-pointed structure. You can count these nodes here. And where do they fall along this 363 circle? So you just take and you divide 363 by 7, okay, or multiply by 1/7. This is 2/7, 3/7, 4/7, 5/7, 6/7. And you're going to get the degrees and where these nodes are positioned along here. So this is 51.857142 degrees. And I broke these into these slices, and these are broken into 11-degree slices. Instead of 33, there's 33 intervals, each one 11 degrees. And then if you want to look at and take the 1089 multiples, if you just look at the seven of them and you divide these by seven, I essentially would show you that the 1089 multiples, the first seven shells, will fall exactly on these points here. And actually you will get, if you follow the flow of energy from 1089 to 2178 to 3267, you're going to get a seven-pointed star. That seven-pointed star, I think that's this here on the goddess on her crown. This, look at the Statue of Liberty. It's also got seven rays coming out of it. It came out of France. France took a lot of things out of Egypt. All right, so that's interesting. I could go into more of this a little bit later, but this is the seven-pointed star that I believe each one of these notes represents the seven Osiris gates. Okay, I could go into more of this of why, like if you notice here, when we go from 1089 to 2178, there are three nodes in between, right? 1, 2, 3. So in between each node, there's 4 and 5/7. If you look at these lines coming through here, you multiply that by three nodes, you get 14 plus 1/7. Osiris was known as the number 14. And the 1/7 is up here. The 1/7 corresponds to the inversion node or the rebirth, perhaps. So I think this is also linked to the physics and how energy is being transferred. And just like the gods and the goddesses represent divine aspects, different characteristics of the divine, this is showing you Osiris here. And then we can look at the movement through these gates. We think of these nodes as gates. You have to have coherency to move through, to pass through these different gates. If you don't have the coherency, you don't pass through the gates. All right, so we started this as as a study of spider silk, and I showed you some geometry, harmonic whole number geometry. And I really believe through the remembrance of the etheric lattice, you have the potential to awaken to your real Jedi nature. Because people ask me, like, what are we going to do with this? Even if we know this math, even if we see all this, it's you have geometry within the cells of your body. And that geometry needs to connect to this invisible lattice that's between you and me, just like the planets do, and just like the galaxy is, it's coherent with that invisible grid, and then you have information or energy flow. So we connect back to this lattice, which by the way is everywhere. You have the flow of energy. I believe it will slow down aging, disease, many of these things. Because right now I think we're not fully connected. We're like a radio station that has static. And I think the ancient Egyptians knew how to pull the life force to their physical structures. So why is this transformative, this information? Because I think the universe is watching humanity and their transformation from a linear to a multidimensional state in a physical body. So if you become multidimensional, we are multidimensional, but if you can take your avatar and with your senses, if you have the ability to elevate that so that now instead of decoding 2% of absolute reality, you're locking into more of 100%, then you are achieving or going to this multidimensional state. And the information and transfer of all this knowledge can go back and forth. You're more connected to the source. Okay, so here is the 3-6 code. This is you're interested in the book. This is the QR code. You can get this at Amazon. And then you've already found your way here to my YouTube channel, so you probably don't need this one, but share, please share. I thought I would dump a little bit of what I presented, and so that you, if you did not attend the conference, you have access to it. And with that, I think that I will end this. And again, share and thank you for viewing the video.